After a flood destroyed my home, my wealthy family refused to help. I got a night job, and the same truck driver gave me a lift every day. I always brought him a sandwich. Tonight he drove past my stop and locked the doors. We can't stop. Your brother is hiding in the alley. Just look at this. I'm glad to have you here. Follow this story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. The water came without warning. I woke up to the sound of rushing liquid, thinking maybe a pipe had burst somewhere in the building. But when I stepped out of bed, the cold shock of ankle-deep water told me this was something far worse. Hurricane Helena had dumped 3 days of rain on our small Alabama town, and the creek behind my neighborhood had finally surrendered to the pressure. I'm Neil, 63 years old, and until that October morning, I thought I had my life figured out. My little house on Maple Street wasn't much to look at, but it was mine. I'd lived there for 12 years, ever since my divorce, making the mortgage payments from my job at the hardware store. The house had belonged to old Mrs. Patterson before me, and it still smelled faintly of her lavender sachets and cats. I'd grown to love that smell, but water doesn't care about sentiment. By the time the emergency crews reached my street, everything I owned was either floating or ruined. The volunteers helped me salvage what they could, but there wasn't much. A few photographs and frames, some clothes that might survive the washing machine, and the small wooden box where I kept my important papers. Everything else dissolved into muddy memory. Standing in my destroyed living room, watching strangers haul my waterlogged furniture to the curb, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my parents died 15 years ago. Complete helplessness. The insurance adjuster, a tired, ill-looking woman named Janet, delivered the final blow with practice deficiency. Flood damage wasn't covered under my basic homeowner's policy. I'd need to find somewhere else to live while I figured out what came next. That's when I remembered I had family. Katrina lived 23 mi away in Millbrook, in a house that could fit 6 of my old places. My older sister had always been the successful one, the one who'd married well and built a life that looked perfect from the outside. Robert, her husband, owned 3 car dealerships, and Katrina managed a boutique real estate firm that catered to wealthy clients. They'd never had children, but they had money, plenty of it. I hadn't spoken to Katrina in almost 2 years, not since our last awkward Christmas dinner, where she'd made subtle comments about my simple lifestyle while showing off her latest kitchen renovation. But surely when faced with my current situation, she'd remember we were family. Surely she'd help. I called her on Tuesday evening, 3 days after the flood. My voice shook slightly as I explained what had happened. I tried to keep it brief, factual. I didn't want to sound like I was begging. "Oh, Neil," she said, and for a moment, relief flooded through me. Her tone sounded concerned, caring. "That's terrible. I saw the news about the flooding down there. I lost everything, Katrina. The insurance won't cover it. I'm staying at the Red Cross shelter right now, but they say it's only temporary. I was wondering if maybe I could stay with you and Robert for a few weeks just until I get back on my feet." The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice had changed completely. Gone was the concern, replaced by something cold and distant. "Neil, you know Robert and I don't have space for house guests. We're very private people. I wouldn't be any trouble. I just need a place to sleep and shower. I can help around the house. Pay you rent as soon as I find work." Another pause. "Neil, I'm going to be honest with you because that's what family does. You're 63 years old. Maybe it's time to think about whether you've made the right choices in life." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you mean? I mean you're living paycheck to paycheck in a flood zone with no emergency savings, no backup plan? That's not bad luck, Neil. That's poor planning." I gripped the phone tighter, feeling heat rise in my chest. "Katrina, I worked for 37 years. I paid my bills. I kept a roof over my head. One natural disaster doesn't make me irresponsible. Doesn't it, Mom and Dad? taught us both the value of preparing for the future, I listened. You chose to coast through life, working at a hardware store, renting apartments, buying houses you couldn't properly insure. Those are choices, Neil. They have consequences. The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. I'd known my sister could be judgmental, but this was something else entirely. This was calculated meanness. So you won't help me. I didn't say that. I'm helping you by being honest. What you need isn't a handout. You need to take responsibility for your situation and figure out how to improve your life. Robert and I worked hard to build what we have. We can't be expected to bail out everyone who makes poor decisions. Everyone as if I were just another charity case she'd decided didn't deserve her attention. I'm your brother, Katrina, and I love you. But love doesn't mean enabling destructive patterns. If you really want to change your life, you'll find a way to do it yourself. Character is built through adversity, not through getting rescued. She used the same tone she might use to decline a dinner invitation. Polite, but firm, final. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, lying on a cot in the Red Cross shelter, listening to the snores and whispers of 30 other displaced people, I stared at the ceiling and tried to make sense of what had happened. My own sister had essentially told me I deserved to lose everything because I wasn't wealthy like her. She'd turned my crisis into a character evaluation and found me lacking. The next morning, I walked to the nearest employment office and took the first job they offered: overnight custodial work at a medical office complex. The pay was $800 a week, enough to rent a small apartment and buy groceries if I was careful. It wasn't the life I'd planned for my retirement years, but it was survival. The apartment I found was a studio in an old building downtown, $550 a month including utilities. The previous tenant had been a college student who'd left behind the smell of instant noodles and marijuana. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbors' conversations, and the heating system made sounds like an angry ghost. But it was mine. My first night of work, I met Samuel. He was parked outside the medical building when my shift ended at 6 a.m., sitting behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler with Morrison Logistics painted on the side. When I walked past, he rolled down his window. "You the new night guy?" he asked. His voice was rough but friendly, weathered by years of truck stop coffee and highway diesel fumes. "That's me," I said. "I deliver medical supplies here twice a week. Been wondering who they got to replace old Edgar." He studied my face with pale blue eyes, said in a road-worn face, "You look beat, brother. Long walk home, about 4 miles. Not too bad." Samuel shook his head. "Nah, that's too far for a man your age after working all night. Hop in. I'll give you a ride." I hesitated. I'd grown up being taught not to accept rides from strangers. But something about Samuel felt trustworthy. Maybe it was his directness, or maybe I was just too tired to care about safety. The inside of his truck was surprisingly clean and organized. It smelled like black coffee and pine air freshener, with a hint of the vanilla candle hanging from his rear view mirror. The radio played quiet country music, and the heater worked perfectly. "Name's Samuel," he said as we pulled out of the parking lot. "Samuel Morrison. This is my truck, my route, my life for the past 18 years. Neil, and thank you for this." "You didn't have to." "Of course I did. That's what people do for each other. Where am I dropping you?" I gave him my address, and we rode in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Samuel was about my age, maybe a little younger, with gray hair and hands that showed the calluses of hard work. Everything about him spoke of a man who understood what it meant to struggle. "Mind if I ask what brought you to the night shift?" he said as we turned onto my street. I found myself telling him about the flood, about losing my house, about starting over at 63. I didn't mention Katrina's rejection. That humiliation was still too fresh to share with anyone, even a kind stranger. "Damn," Samuel said when I finished. Mother Nature's got a mean streak, that's for sure. But you're working. You got a roof over your head. That's something. When he stopped in front of my building, I reached for my wallet. What do I owe you? Samuel waved me off. Brother, if I charged every person I helped get home safe, I'd be the richest trucker on the road and the loneliest man alive. You just take care of yourself. The next Thursday, he was there again when my shift ended, and the Thursday after that. By the fourth week, it had become routine. Samuel would finish his delivery, I'd finish my cleaning. And we'd ride home together as the sun came up over the Alabama hills. Our conversations grew longer. I learned that Samuel had been married for 28 years to a woman named Grace, who died from cancer 3 years earlier. He had 2 grown daughters who lived in California and worried about him driving long haul at his age. He'd been thinking about retirement, but the road was the only life he'd ever known. Grace always said I was too stubborn to quit. He told me one morning as we sat in his truck outside my building, neither of us in a hurry to end our conversation. She was probably right. I started bringing coffee for both of us, and then pastries from the bakery down the street. Eventually, I began making sandwiches the night before work, ham and Swiss turkey, and provolone, whatever looked good at the grocery store. Samuel always protested, said I didn't need to feed him, but he ate every bite. Man could get used to this kind of service, he said one morning, unwrapping a roast beef sandwich I'd made with horseradish sauce the way my ex-wife used to like it. You're going to spoil an old trucker. Least I can do for the taxi service, I replied. But we both knew it was more than that. Samuel had become the bright spot in my upside-down life. Our morning rides were 20 minutes of easy friendship in a world that had suddenly turned cold and complicated. Sometimes he'd tell me stories about the places his roots took him, the people he'd met in diners and truck stops across the South. Other times we'd sit in comfortable silence, watching the town wake up around us. Samuel never asked about my family, never pushed for details about my past. He seemed to understand that some stories took time to tell. What I didn't tell him was how much those rides meant to me. After Katrina's rejection, after losing everything I'd thought was permanent in my life, Samuel's kindness felt like proof that decent people still existed. He didn't know anything about my bank account or my life choices. He just saw a man who needed help getting home, and he provided it without judgment or conditions. For 3 months, this became my new normal. Work all night, ride home with Samuel, sleep until afternoon, make dinner, make tomorrow's sandwiches, and head back to work. It wasn't the retirement I'd imagined, but it was peaceful in its own way, predictable. I should have known it wouldn't last. I should have known that Katrina wasn't finished with me yet. The first sign something was wrong came on a Thursday morning in January. Samuel and I were sharing coffee in his truck after my shift, watching the sunrise paint the sky orange and pink above the medical building when he mentioned seeing my landlord. Funny thing, Samuel said, unwrapping the turkey and Swiss sandwich I'd made him. Yesterday when I was making my delivery, I saw Bob Jenkins talking to some woman in a fancy car out front of your building. Bob Jenkins owned half the rental properties in downtown, including my studio apartment. He was the kind of landlord who collected rent in person and fixed problems with duct tape and prayer. I'd only spoken to him twice since moving in. Did he say what it was about, I asked, though I couldn't imagine why anyone would need to discuss my tenancy with a stranger. Nah, but she was asking a lot of questions. Real interested in who lived where, how long they'd been there, that kind of thing. Bob looked uncomfortable, kept shaking his head. Samuel took a bite of his sandwich and studied my face. You expecting any visitors? Something cold settled in my stomach. No, nobody knows where I live except you and work. That wasn't entirely true. I'd had to provide my address when I'd applied for county assistance after the flood. I'd put it down on job applications and given it to the few creditors I was slowly paying back. But I couldn't think of any reason someone in a fancy car would be asking my landlord questions about me. Probably nothing Samuel said. But his tone suggested he didn't quite believe it. just seemed odd as all. I tried to push it out of my mind, but the feeling of unease lingered. That evening, as I was getting ready for work, my phone rang. The number looked familiar, but I couldn't place it. "Hello, is this Neil Holloway?" The voice was crisp, professional. "Yes, this is Margaret Collins from Riverside Hospital. I'm calling about the custodial position you applied for last month." I frowned. I hadn't applied anywhere else. I was barely managing my current job, but I needed the income. "I think there's been a mistake. I didn't apply to Riverside." "Really, that's strange. We received your application and we're going to offer you an interview. But then we got some concerning information about your work history." My pulse quickened. "What kind of information?" "Well, I probably shouldn't say, but someone called to let us know you'd had some issues with reliability and substance abuse problems. Given the nature of hospital work, we can't take chances." "That's not true. I've never had a drinking problem, and I've never missed a day of work in my life." Margaret's voice softened slightly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Holloway. I'm just telling you what we were told. If there's been a misunderstanding, maybe you should contact whoever provided that reference." She hung up before I could ask who had called them. I stared at my phone, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Someone had not only submitted a fake application in my name, but had also called to sabotage my chances of getting hired. Who would do such a thing, and why? The answer came to me slowly, like ice water dripping down my spine. The next morning, I asked Samuel to drive past Katrina's neighborhood on our way to my apartment. It was a detour that added 15 minutes to our trip, but I needed to see something. Millbrook Estates sat behind row iron gates that never quite closed properly. A neighborhood where every house looked like it belonged in a magazine. Katrina's place was a 2-story colonial with white columns and perfectly trimmed hedges that probably cost more to maintain than I made in a month. "Nice area," Samuel commented as we drove slowly down Magnolia Lane. "What are we looking for?" I didn't answer immediately. I was staring at the silver BMW in Katrina's driveway, the same car I'd seen her driving the last time we'd had dinner together. But it was the conversation I could see happening in her front yard that made my blood run cold. Katrina was standing next to her mailbox, talking animatedly to a man in a brown uniform. Even from a distance, I could see her gesturing emphatically, shaking her head, making the same kinds of hand movements she'd used as a child when she was lying to our parents about broken dishes or missing cookies. "Keep driving," I said quietly. "Everything okay, Neil? Just keep driving." That afternoon, I called every job I'd applied for in the past month. 3 different employers told me the same story. They'd received calls warning them about my unreliability and personal problems. 2 others said they'd gotten letters detailing my supposed history of theft and dishonesty. All of the calls and letters had come from someone claiming to be a former employer, but the details were vague enough that no one had bothered to verify them. I was being systematically sabotaged, and there was only one person with both the motive and the connections to pull it off. When I confronted Katrina that evening, calling her from the parking lot outside the medical building, she didn't even try to deny it. "Neil, I told you I'm helping you by not enabling your poor choices. Lying to potential employers isn't helping me, it's destroying me." Her voice remained eerily calm. "You're destroying yourself. I'm just making sure you can't drag innocent people down with you." "What the hell does that mean?" "It means I know you better than these employers do. I know your pattern of taking the easy way out of expecting other people to solve your problems. If you got hired somewhere better, you just coast along until the next crisis, and then you'd be calling me again begging for help." The cruelty in her reasoning was breathtaking. She was sabotaging my attempts to improve my situation while claiming she was doing it for my own good. "You're my sister," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "We're supposed to look out for each other. I am looking out for you. I'm looking out. I'm forcing you to confront the reality of your situation instead of running away from it." You need to learn to solve your own problems, Neil. You're too old to keep depending on other people. I'm not depending on anyone. I'm working, I'm paying my bills, I'm trying to rebuild my life. With whose help? That truck driver who gives you rides? The charity workers who found you your apartment? You're still looking for people to rescue you instead of rescuing yourself. I hung up on her, but her words followed me into work that night. Was she right? Was I just another charity case looking for handouts and shortcuts? No. I'd worked every day since the flood. I'd taken the first job offered to me and shown up consistently. I was slowly paying back the money I'd borrowed from the Red Cross. I wasn't asking for rescue. I was asking for the basic decency that family members should show each other, but Katrina's campaign of sabotage was working. Over the next few weeks, I applied for dozens of positions and heard back from exactly none of them. Word was somehow spreading through the local job market that Neil Holloway was trouble, a bad risk, someone to avoid. The worst part was the isolation that came with it. I started noticing that people in my extended family were treating me differently. Cousins who'd always been friendly grew distant. My Aunt Dorothy, who used to call me every few months, stopped returning my messages. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, the paranoia that comes from too much stress and too little sleep. Then my cousin Mike called. Neil, I gotta ask you something and I hope you'll be straight with me. Mike was 3 years older than me, the son of my father's brother. We'd been close growing up, had stayed in touch sporadically over the years. His voice sounded strained, uncomfortable. What's going on? Mike, Katrina called me last week. She's worried about you. Says you've been drinking heavily since the flood, making up stories about the family not helping you. I felt the ground shift beneath me. She said, what? She says, you've been calling her drunk, making accusations, threatening to spread lies about her if she doesn't give you money. She's scared, Neil. She thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. The sophistication of Katrina's lie was stunning. She'd taken my legitimate anger about her refusal to help and twisted it into evidence of mental illness and substance abuse. Worse, she'd made herself the victim of my supposed instability. Mike, I haven't had a drink in 2 months. I can't afford to drink. And I've never threatened Katrina about anything. Well, that's not what she says. She showed me some pretty disturbing voicemails. Neil, you sounded not good. What voicemails? I haven't left her any voicemails except asking for help after the flood. A long pause. Maybe you don't remember. If you've been drinking, I'm not drinking, I shouted, then forced myself to lower my voice. Mike, she's lying. I don't know why, but she's spreading false stories about me. Why would she do that? You're her brother. It was the same question I'd been asking myself for weeks. Why was Katrina working so hard to destroy what little life I'd managed to rebuild? What did she gain from keeping me isolated and struggling? I don't know, I said, and that was the truth. But I'm telling you, whatever she showed you, whatever she said, it's not real. Mike's silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Finally, he sighed. Neil, I want to believe you, but Katrina's got proof, recordings, documentation. And honestly, losing your house like that, having to start over at your age, it would be understandable if you were having a hard time coping. After he hung up, I sat in my studio apartment staring at the wall and trying to piece together what was happening. Katrina wasn't just refusing to help me. She was actively working to make sure no one else would help me either. She was systematically destroying my reputation, my relationships, and my opportunities for improvement. But why? What could she possibly gain from keeping me isolated and desperate? The answer came to me during my shift that night. While I was mopping the floors of the medical building and thinking about the conversation with Mike, Katrina had mentioned something during our last fight, something I'd been too angry to process at the time. She'd said she knew my pattern of expecting other people to solve my problems. She talked about me calling her again when the next crisis hit, as if she was certain there would be a next crisis. As if she was counting on it for the first time since this nightmare began. I started to wonder if there was something Katrina was afraid I might discover. Something that would explain why she was so determined to keep me desperate and alone. Something she'd been hiding for a very long time. When Samuel picked me up the next morning, I was quiet during our ride. He seemed to sense my mood and didn't push for conversation. But as we pulled up in front of my building, he turned to me with a concerned expression. "Neil, I got to tell you something. Yesterday when I was making my delivery, I saw that same woman again. The one in the fancy car who was talking to your landlord." I looked up sharply. "We're parked across from the medical building." She was there when I arrived, and she was still there when I left, just sitting in her car, watching the entrance. A chill ran down my spine. "Did you get a good look at her?" Samuel nodded grimly. Silver BMW, blonde hair, expensive clothes. She was taking pictures, Neil. Pictures of the building, of people coming and going. That's not normal curiosity. I knew even before he described her who it was. Katrina was watching me, documenting my routine, my habits, my associations. The question was why, Samuel, he said slowly. "I think I'm in some kind of trouble. Real trouble." He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. I figured as much. "What do you need?" The simple offer of help after weeks of doors slamming in my face and family members turning away was almost overwhelming. I had to clear my throat before I could speak. "I need someone to watch my back, someone I can trust." "You got it," Samuel said without hesitation. "Whatever's going on, we'll figure it out together." As I climbed the stairs to my apartment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Katrina had underestimated me, and she definitely underestimated Samuel. She thought she could isolate me completely, make me so desperate that I'd have no choice but to accept whatever she was planning. She was wrong. But as I unlocked my door and stepped into the small space that had become my refuge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. Some crucial piece of the puzzle that would explain why my own sister was working so hard to destroy me. I was about to find out just how deep her deception ran and just how much I stood to lose if I didn't stop her soon. It was the second Thursday in February when Samuel saved my life, though I didn't realize it at the time. The night started like any other. I finished my custodial rounds at the medical building, cleaned the break room one last time, and locked up at exactly 6:00 a.m. Samuel's truck was idling in its usual spot, exhaust visible in the cold morning air. But something was different about his expression when I climbed into the passenger seat. Instead of his usual easy smile, Samuel's jaw was tight, his pale blue eyes scanning the parking lot like he expected trouble. "Morning," I said, settling into the worn leather seat and reaching for the thermos of coffee I'd brought to share. "You seem tense." Samuel put the truck in gear, but didn't immediately pull out of the parking lot. Instead, he sat there for a moment, hands gripping the steering wheel, studying the rearview mirror. "Neil, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." The seriousness in his voice made my stomach clench. "What's going on? Have you told anyone about our morning routine? About me giving you rides home?" I shook my head. "No. Why would I?" "Because yesterday, when I was making my delivery, that woman was back, the blonde in the BMW. But this time she wasn't alone." Samuel reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out his cell phone. The screen was cracked from years of truck stop parking lots and highway vibrations, but I could clearly see the photo he'd taken. A silver BMW sat in the medical building parking lot, and next to it stood two men in dark jackets. One was talking on a phone while the other pointed toward the building entrance. I recognized her from the other times I'd seen her. Samuel continued, his voice low and urgent. "Your sister, right. But those men with her, they weren't family. They looked like the kind of people you hire when you want something done quietly. My mouth went dry. What kind of something? The kind where someone gets hurt? Samuel's fingers drummed against the steering wheel. Neil, I've been driving truck for 18 years. I've seen enough bad situations to know when one's brewing. This isn't just about job applications anymore. I stared at the photo, trying to process what I was seeing. Katrina with hired muscle watching my workplace, planning something that required backup. The implications made my head spin. What do you think they want? I think Samuel said, slowly. They want you gone. Question is whether that means out of town or something more permanent. The words hit me like ice water. My own sister was planning to have me hurt, maybe killed. It seemed impossible. But looking at the evidence on Samuel's phone, I couldn't deny what was happening. Did you hear anything they said? Samuel nodded grimly. I parked where I could listen without being seen. The blonde, your sister, she was giving instructions. Something about making it look like an accident. About timing it right so nobody would ask questions. My hands started shaking. An accident. She mentioned something about you walking home alone, about how dangerous the neighborhoods can be for an elderly man. How easy it would be for someone to get mugged, maybe beaten too badly to recover. The casual cruelty of it was breathtaking. Katrina wasn't just planning to have me hurt. She was planning to make it look random, like urban violence that happened to strike an unlucky target. No one would investigate too deeply. No one would suspect family involvement. There's more, Samuel said, scrolling through his phone. I managed to record some of their conversation. He pressed play, and suddenly Katrina's voice filled the truck cabin. Tiny but clear through the phone's small speaker. Has to happen soon. He's getting suspicious, asking too many questions. If he starts digging into the past, a male voice interrupted her, growly and professional. What about the truck driver? He's become a complication. Handle him too if necessary. Make it look like they were both in the wrong place at the wrong time. My blood turned to ice. They weren't just planning to hurt me. They were planning to hurt Samuel because he'd been kind enough to help me, because he'd become the one person in my life who might ask questions if something happened to me. Samuel stopped the recording and looked at me with grim determination. That's when I decided to take action. Whatever your sister is hiding, whatever she's afraid you might find out, it's big enough that she's willing to kill for it. We have to go to the police, I said. But even as I spoke the words, I knew how it would sound. An elderly custodian accusing his successful sister of plotting murder with only a cell phone recording and some suspicious photos as evidence. We could try, Samuel agreed, but think about it. She's wealthy, connected, respected in the community. You're a flood victim, working night shifts, and living in a studio apartment. Who do you think they're going to believe? He was right, and we both knew it. Katrina had spent months building a narrative about my mental instability and supposed drinking problems. If I went to the police now claiming she was trying to have me killed, it would just confirm everything she'd been telling people about my deteriorating mental state. So what do we do? Samuel smiled for the first time that morning, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. We turned the tables. See, your sister made one crucial mistake. What's that? She assumed I was just some dumb trucker who wouldn't notice what was happening. She underestimated both of us. Samuel put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot. But instead of heading toward my apartment, he turned in the opposite direction. We're not going to your place this morning, Neil. It's not safe. Where are we going? Somewhere we can figure out what your sister is really afraid of you discovering. Because people don't plan murders over family disagreements, brother. They plan them over secrets. Big, expensive secrets. As we drove through the awakening city, Samuel laid out what he'd observed over the past few weeks. Katrina's surveillance hadn't been random or casual. She'd been tracking my routine with military precision, noting when I worked, how I got home, who I talked to. She'd been building a profile of my vulnerabilities, looking for the perfect opportunity to strike. "The thing is," Samuel said as we pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner on the outskirts of town, "she's been watching you for weeks, but I've been watching her too. And yesterday I followed her after she left the medical building. Where did she go? To a law office downtown. She was there for almost 2 hours, came out carrying a briefcase and looking nervous. After that, she went to the bank. Then, she made a stop that really got my attention." Samuel parked the truck and turned to face me fully. She went to a storage facility on Industrial Boulevard, Unit 237. She had a key, went in alone, stayed for about 20 minutes. When she came out, the briefcase was gone. My mind raced. What do you think was in the briefcase? Documents, papers that are important enough to hide but accessible enough to retrieve quickly when needed. Samuel's expression grew thoughtful. "Neil, I want you to think back when your parents died. Was there anything about the estate settlement that seemed strange to you?" The question hit me like a lightning bolt. I'd been so focused on the immediate crisis of Katrina's sabotage and threats that I hadn't thought about the deeper past, about the foundational relationship between us that had shaped everything that followed. "There wasn't much to settle," I said slowly. "Mom and Dad lived modestly. They had the house, some savings, a few investments. Katrina handled everything because she was the executive. She said after paying off their debts and funeral expenses, there wasn't much left. Maybe $15,000 total. Did you see any of the paperwork, bank statements, insurance policies, property valuations?" I shook my head. "Katrina said it would just upset me to go through all the details. She handled it all and gave me my share, $7,500. Samuel's eyes narrowed. "That seems light for two people who owned their home outright and had been working for 40 years. That's what I thought at the time, but Katrina showed me the funeral bills. Said Dad had some business debts I didn't know about. It was a difficult time. I was dealing with my divorce, starting over. I trusted her to handle things fairly. And you never questioned it later." "No, why would I? She was my sister. We might not have been close, but I never imagined she'd steal from me." Samuel leaned back in his seat, processing what I told him. "Neil, I think your sister has been planning this for a long time. I think she stole your inheritance 15 years ago, and she's been terrified ever since that you'd figure it out." The idea was so enormous, so devastating, that I couldn't immediately accept it. Katrina had managed our parents' estate while I was falling apart from my divorce. She'd handled all the paperwork, all the legal requirements, all the financial details. If she'd wanted to cheat me out of my inheritance, she would have had every opportunity. But why wait until now to get rid of me if she stole my inheritance 15 years ago? Why not just leave me alone to live my life in ignorance? Because something changed recently. Something that made her afraid you'd start asking questions. Samuel's voice grew urgent. "Think, Neil. What's different now compared to 6 months ago?" I considered the question, running through the major changes in my life since the flood. Losing my house, taking the night job, meeting Samuel, dealing with Katrina's rejection, and sabotage. Then it hit me. "The flood insurance claim," I said quietly. "When I was trying to get compensation for my house, the insurance company required documentation going back years. Property records, ownership history, any inheritance or gift documentation that might affect the claim." Samuel nodded. "They were looking for anything that might give you additional resources or legal standing." "What did you tell them?" "That my house was all I owned, that I'd inherited nothing when my parents died." The implications of what I was saying began to dawn on me. But if that wasn't true, if there was an inheritance I didn't know about, then you might have had grounds for a much larger insurance claim. Or if the inheritance included property, you might have had other options for rebuilding. Samuel's voice grew grim. "And if you'd started digging into your family's financial history to support your insurance claim, you might have discovered what really happened to your parents' estate. We sat in silence for a moment, watching early morning commuters stream past the diner windows. The implications of Samuel's theory were staggering. If Katrina had stolen my inheritance, she'd been living off money that was rightfully mine for 15 years. Worse, she'd watched me struggle through job loss, divorce, and now the flood. All while sitting on resources that could have helped me. "We need proof," I said finally. "We need to get into that storage unit," Samuel agreed. "But that's going to be tricky. It's a secure facility and we can't exactly ask Katrina for the key." "What about breaking in?" Samuel shook his head. "Too risky. Security cameras, alarms, possible felony charges if we're caught. We need a smarter approach." Like what Samuel's smile returned, and this time it held a hint of mischief. "Like following her the next time she visits it. Your sister's been planning your demise for weeks, but she's made one crucial error, which is she doesn't know that we know what she's planning. She thinks she still has the element of surprise." Samuel started the truck engine, "But tonight we're going to turn the tables. Tonight we're going to find out exactly what Katrina's been hiding." As we drove toward a motel where Samuel said I could stay safely until evening, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope mixed with righteous anger. Katrina had spent weeks making me feel like a burden, like a failure who deserved his misfortune. She'd isolated me from family and sabotaged my attempts to rebuild. But if Samuel was right, if she'd been stealing from me all along, then everything made sense. Her refusal to help after the flood wasn't about tough love or character building. It was about preventing me from getting back on my feet enough to start asking inconvenient questions about the past. "Samuel," I said as we pulled into the motel parking lot, "whatever we find tonight, I want you to know that you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "The knowledge that I'm not alone. That someone gives a damn whether I live or die." Samuel's weathered face softened. "Brother family isn't about blood. It's about who stands by you when the world falls apart. You've got family. You've just been looking in the wrong places." That evening, as we prepared to follow Katrina to whatever secret she was hiding, I realized that Samuel was right. I'd spent my entire adult life believing that family meant unconditional support, that blood relations would always protect each other. But sometimes the people who share your DNA are the ones who hurt you most, and sometimes the people who become your true family are the ones who show up in 18-wheelers with coffee and sandwiches, ready to risk everything to help a stranger find justice. Tonight we were going to discover just how deep Katrina's betrayal ran, and tomorrow we were going to make sure she paid for every lie she'd told and every dollar she'd stolen. The reckoning was coming. Samuel and I spent that day at the Sunrise Motel, a faded establishment on the highway where the rooms rented by the week and nobody asked questions about why a trucker and an elderly custodian were planning what amounted to surveillance. Samuel had registered under a false name and paid cash, explaining to the desk clerk that we were taking turns driving and needed somewhere quiet to rest. The room smelled like disinfectant and old carpet, but it felt safer than my studio apartment. Samuel had brought supplies: a pair of binoculars, a camera with a telephoto lens, energy bars, and 2 thermoses of coffee. He'd also brought something I hadn't expected: a laptop computer. "My daughter got this for me last Christmas." He explained, opening the silver device on the scratched motel table. "Said I needed to join the 21st century. I mostly use it for email and checking weather reports, but it's got one feature that's going to help us tonight." He clicked through several screens until a map appeared showing our location and the surrounding area. "GPS tracking. If we can get close enough to your sister's car, I can attach a magnetic tracker I borrowed from my dispatcher. We'll know everywhere she goes." I stared at the technology, impressed despite the circumstances. "You came prepared. 20 years of marriage to a woman who solved crossword puzzles for fun teaches you to think ahead," Samuel said with a sad smile. "Grace always said the best plans have backup plans." We spent the afternoon reviewing everything we knew about Katrina's routine. She typically left her house around 7:00 p.m. on weekdays, often driving to her real estate office to handle paperwork or meet with clients. Samuel had observed her visiting the storage facility twice in the past month, always in the evening when the facility was less busy. Tonight feels different, though, Samuel said, adjusting the focus on his binoculars as we practiced our surveillance setup. Yesterday, after she met with those men, she seemed agitated, rushed. People make mistakes when they're under pressure. At 6:30 p.m., we drove to Millbrook Estates in Samuel's truck, parking 3 blocks away in the lot of a grocery store that had a clear view of Katrina Street. Samuel had changed the license plate on his truck, replacing it with one he kept for deliveries to job sites where contractors sometimes borrowed company vehicles. "Won't someone notice it's missing?" I asked. "It's registered to a truck that's been in the shop for 2 months. By the time anyone figures out it's been borrowed, this whole thing will be over." We didn't have long to wait. At 7:15 p.m., Katrina's silver BMW pulled out of her driveway. She was alone, which was both a relief and a concern. Relief because it meant fewer people to avoid. Concern because it might mean she was planning to meet the men from yesterday somewhere else. Following someone without being detected is harder than it looks in movies. Samuel had to balance staying close enough to track Katrina's movements with remaining far enough back that she wouldn't notice the same truck behind her for multiple turns. He was surprisingly good at it, using other vehicles as cover and timing traffic lights to maintain distance. Katrina's first stop was downtown at the law office Samuel had mentioned. She parked in front of a building that housed 3 different legal firms, and Samuel managed to attach the GPS tracker to her car while she was inside. The whole operation took less than 30 seconds. "Former military?" I asked as he slid back into the truck. "Former husband of a woman who locked herself out of her car twice a month for 28 years, he replied. "You learn to work fast with car doors." Katrina emerged from the law office 45 minutes later, carrying a manila envelope and looking around nervously before getting into her car. Samuel's laptop immediately showed her location as a blinking dot on the map. Her next stop was the storage facility. Industrial self-storage sat on a 5-acre lot, surrounded by chain-link fencing and security cameras. The facility was older than some of the more modern storage companies, with rows of orange roll-up doors that looked like garage doors in a military barracks. Katrina used a key card to enter through the main gate, driving slowly toward the back of the complex. "Unit 237. Samuel murmured, consulting a facility map he'd printed from their website. "Back corner away from the office and main traffic. Smart choice if you're trying to avoid attention." We parked across the street behind an abandoned gas station, using Samuel's binoculars to watch as Katrina pulled up in front of a unit in the last row. She looked around carefully before getting out of her car, then used a key to open the roll-up door. Even from our distance, I could see that the storage unit was nearly full. Boxes lined the walls, and what looked like filing cabinets sat in the middle of the space. Katrina went directly to one of the filing cabinets, opening a drawer and removing several folders. "She's done this before," Samuel observed. "Knows exactly where everything is." Katrina spread the folders on top of one of the boxes, comparing documents from the manila envelope she'd brought with papers from the storage unit. Even through the binoculars, I could see her frustration growing. She kept shaking her head, making notes on a yellow legal pad, checking and rechecking the papers. "Something's wrong," I said. "She looks upset." Maybe the lawyers told her something she didn't want to hear. After 20 minutes, Katrina gathered everything back into the folders and returned them to the filing cabinet. But instead of leaving immediately, she walked to the back of the storage unit and opened a large cardboard box. From inside, she pulled out what looked like a thick photo album. She stood there for several minutes, flipping through pages, and even from our distance, I could see her shoulders shaking. She was crying. "What do you think she's looking at?" Samuel asked. Family pictures may be mom and dad's things from after they died, or evidence of what she did to you. Eventually, Katrina put the album back in the box and left the storage unit, carefully locking the door behind her. She sat in her car for another 10 minutes, making phone calls and apparently arguing with whoever was on the other end. Finally, she drove away, heading back toward her house. Samuel and I waited another hour to make sure she wasn't coming back. Then we made our move. The security cameras are motion activated, Samuel explained as we approached the facility's back fence. If we stay low and move slowly, we might be able to avoid triggering them. Breaking into the storage facility turned out to be easier than expected. The back fence had a gap where one of the posts had been damaged, probably by a delivery truck backing up too close. We squeezed through the opening and made our way to Unit 237, staying in the shadows between buildings. The lock on Katrina's unit was more sophisticated than the standard padlock most people used. But Samuel had come prepared for that too. From his jacket pocket, he produced a set of lockpicks that looked like they belonged in a spy movie. "Another skill learned during your marriage?" I asked. Grace had a habit of locking herself out of everything he said, with a grin, working the picks with practiced efficiency. Cars, houses, her jewelry box, you name it. I got tired of calling locksmiths. The lock clicked open after 5 minutes of careful manipulation. Samuel lifted the roll-up door just enough for us to crawl inside, then closed it behind us and turned on a small flashlight. The storage unit was like a museum of my family's history. I recognized furniture from my parents' house, including the dining room table where we'd eaten Sunday dinners for 20 years. Boxes labeled in my mother's careful handwriting, Christmas decorations, photo albums, dad's tools, important papers. But it was the filing cabinet that drew our attention. The drawer Katrina had accessed was labeled estate documents. Inside, we found folder after folder of papers related to my parents' finances: bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, property deeds. Samuel spread them across the top of a box while I held the flashlight. What we discovered made my hands shake so violently, I almost dropped the light. My parents hadn't been struggling financially when they died. They'd been wealthy. Bank statements showed account balances totaling over $300,000. Investment portfolios detailed stocks and bonds worth another $120,000. Most shocking of all was the life insurance policy, $200,000, with both Katrina and me listed as equal beneficiaries. $620,000, Samuel said, quietly adding up the totals. Split between 2 children, that's over $300,000 each. I stared at the documents, trying to reconcile them with what Katrina had told me 15 years ago. She'd said our parents died, nearly broke that after paying debts and funeral expenses. There was only $15,000 to split between us. "Look at this," Samuel said, holding up another folder. "Probate court documents." The official estate filing showed the same numbers we just discovered, but attached to it was a second set of documents, filed 6 months later, that told a completely different story. The revised filing claimed that additional debts had been discovered, reducing the estate's value to exactly $15,000. "What kind of debts?" I asked. Samuel flipped through more papers until he found what looked like loan documents. Business loans guaranteed by your father, equipment purchases for a company called, Morrison Landscaping Services. My father never owned a landscaping company. He worked at the phone company for 37 years. No, but look at the signature on these loan documents. Samuel held up the papers so I could see them clearly. "That's not your father's handwriting." He was right. The signature was close, but the loops and angles were subtly different from the documents I knew my father had signed. Someone had forged his name on loan agreements totaling over $400,000, then used those fake debts to justify stealing most of the inheritance. She created fake companies, fake loans, fake debts. I said, the enormity of the fraud beginning to sink in. She stole everything and made it look legal. "And she's been living off your money for 15 years, Samuel added grimly. That house, that car, that real estate business she's so proud of. All of it built with your inheritance. We continued searching through the files, finding more evidence of Katrina's systematic theft. She'd been careful, methodical, creating a paper trail that would survive casual scrutiny while hiding the documents that prove the fraud. Most devastating was a folder labeled Neil Personal Information. Inside were copies of my divorce papers, employment records, credit reports, and what looked like surveillance photographs taken over the years. Pictures of me going to work shopping for groceries, attending my ex-wife's wedding to her new husband. Katrina had been watching me for over a decade, documenting my life, making sure I never got successful enough to start asking questions about the past. She's been planning this for years, Samuel said, studying a timeline written in Katrina's handwriting. Look at this. The timeline started 15 years ago with estate settled and satisfied with explanation. It continued through various milestones in my life and lost jobs struggling financially and divorced, distracted, and moved to Maple Street house isolated from family. The most recent entry was chilling. Hurricane Helena opportunity to eliminate problem permanently. She's been waiting for the right moment to get rid of you. Samuel said the flood was perfect because it made you desperate and alone. But it was the last folder in the filing cabinet that revealed the full scope of Katrina's desperation. Inside were recent bank statements showing her current financial situation, and it wasn't good. The real estate business was failing, bleeding money every month. Her personal accounts were nearly empty. She'd burned through most of my inheritance and desperately needed more money to maintain her lifestyle. She's broke, I said, staring at the numbers. After 15 years, she spent it all. Which is why she can't afford to let you find out the truth, Samuel replied. If you discovered the theft and sued her, she'd lose everything. The house, the business, maybe even face criminal charges. So she decided to kill me instead, not just kill you. Make it look like an accident so she could claim your life insurance too. One final score to solve her money problems. We spent another hour photographing documents with Samuel's camera, building a comprehensive record of Katrina's fraud. As we worked, I felt my shock transform into something harder and colder. Rage. My sister hadn't just stolen my money. She'd stolen 15 years of my life watching me struggle and fail while she lived comfortably off my inheritance. She'd sabotaged my relationships, destroyed my opportunities, and planned my murder, all to cover up her original crime. We have enough, Samuel said, finally packing up his camera. Bank records, forged documents, proof of the real estate values. Any court in the country would convict her. Good, I said, my voice steady despite the anger burning in my chest. Because I want her to lose everything, just like she tried to make me lose everything. As we prepared to leave the storage unit, Samuel found one more piece of evidence that changed everything. Hidden behind the filing cabinet was a small metal box, the kind banks use for safe deposit storage. Inside were the original copies of my parents' wills, insurance policies, and property deeds. The real documents that Katrina had hidden while she submitted forged copies to the probate court. But most damaging was a handwritten letter from our father dated just weeks before his death. To my son Neil, the letter began, I want you to know that the money your mother and I are leaving behind comes from 40 years of hard work and careful saving. We've always been proud of both our children, but we've worried that Katrina's lifestyle and spending habits might not serve her well in the long run. That's why we're leaving the house and land to you, along with the larger share of our savings. Katrina will receive enough to be comfortable, but we trust you to use your inheritance wisely and perhaps help your sister if she truly needs it. Take care of yourself, son. We love you, Dad. I read the letter 3 times before the full impact hit me. My parents hadn't just left me an equal share of their estate. They'd left me the majority, along with a request to help Katrina if necessary. Instead, she'd stolen it all and spent 15 years making sure I'd never be in a position to discover the truth. Neil, Samuel said quietly, we need to get out of here. We've got what we came for. As we replaced everything in the filing cabinet and prepared to leave, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. Samuel, I want to thank you for everything you've done. But from here on out, this gets dangerous. Katrina's already planning to hurt you because you've been helping me. You should disappear. Change your route. Stay away from me until this is over. Samuel looked at me like I'd suggested he abandon a wounded soldier on a battlefield. Brother, I didn't come this far to walk away now. You've got proof of what she did, but you still need help bringing her down. Besides, she threatened Grace's memory when she threatened me. That makes this personal. She could have you killed. She could try, Samuel said with grim determination. But your sister's made one crucial mistake that's going to cost her everything. What's that? She picked a fight with the wrong truck driver. As we left the storage facility and headed back to the motel, I realized that tomorrow would bring the most difficult confrontation of my life. I would have to face the sister who'd stolen my inheritance, sabotaged my life, and planned my murder. But I wouldn't be facing her alone. The meeting was set for 10:00 a.m. at the Millbrook Country Club neutral territory, where Katrina felt comfortable and confident. Samuel had suggested the location, reasoning that she'd be less likely to bring hired muscle to a place where she was known and respected. I'd called her the night before using a calm, defeated tone to request one final conversation about our family situation. I've been thinking about what you said I'd told her over the phone about taking responsibility for my choices. Maybe you're right. Maybe it's time I stopped fighting and accepted reality? The relief in her voice had been audible. Oh, Neil, I'm so glad you're finally seeing reason. We can work something out, I'm sure. Something that's fair for everyone. Fair. The word had almost made me laugh. Samuel dropped me off 3 blocks from the country club, parking where he could watch the entrance with his binoculars. We'd planned every detail of the confrontation, including multiple exit strategies in case things went wrong. The manila envelope in my hands contained copies of every document we'd found, organized in chronological order to tell the complete story of Katrina's 15-year deception. Remember, Samuel had said as I got out of the truck, she's going to deny everything at first. Don't show her the evidence all at once. Let her dig herself deeper with each lie. The Millbrook Country Club looked like something from a movie about wealthy Southern families. White columns, manicured lawns, and the kind of understated luxury that whispered rather than shouted about money. I'd never been inside before, but the hostess recognized Katrina's name and led me to a private dining room overlooking the golf course. Katrina was already there, sitting at a small table with her back to the window. She was dressed impeccably, as always, in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup flawless. She looked every inch the successful businesswoman, the responsible sister who'd built a life worth envying. She also looked nervous. "Neil," she said, standing to greet me with a careful smile. "You look better. Have you been getting more sleep?" I sat down across from her, placing the manila envelope on the table between us. "I've had a lot to think about lately. I'm sure you have, and I want you to know that I've been thinking too about our relationship, about how we can move forward as a family." The waitress brought coffee without being asked, apparently part of Katrina's regular routine. I waited until we were alone again before responding. "I've been thinking about Mom and Dad," I said. "About what they would have wanted for us." Katrina's smile softened, becoming more genuine. "They would have wanted us to take care of each other, to be there for family when times get hard." "Is that what you've been doing, taking care of me?" "In my own way, yes. I know it might not seem like it, but tough love is still love, Neil. Sometimes caring about someone means not enabling their mistakes." I nodded thoughtfully. You're probably right. I've made a lot of mistakes over the years. Poor financial decisions, bad planning, not preparing for emergencies. Exactly. Katrina leaned forward, slightly encouraged by my apparent agreement. But it's never too late to change. You're still relatively young, still capable of building a better life for yourself. With your help, well within reason. I can't just hand you money, Neil. That would only reinforce the patterns that got you into trouble in the first place. But maybe we could find you a better job, a better place to live. Something more suitable for a man your age. Something more suitable like a grave, I thought, but didn't say. That's very generous, I said instead. But I have to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Katrina's expression grew cautious. Of course. What is it? When Mom and Dad died when you handled their estate, was there really only $15,000 left after paying their debts? The question hit her like a physical blow. I saw her stiffen, saw her carefully composed expression flicker for just a moment before she regained control. Neil, we've been over this. I showed you all the paperwork at the time, the funeral expenses, the outstanding bills, the legal fees. There wasn't much left, but there could have been more originally before the debts were paid. Yet there was more initially. But you have to understand, Mom and Dad had made some financial commitments that weren't immediately obvious. Business loans, guarantees for friends, things like that. Her first lie. Samuel had been right about letting her dig herself deeper. What kind of business loans? Oh, you know, Dad. He was always trying to help people co-signing for neighbors who needed equipment loans, that sort of thing. Very generous, but not always wise. Equipment loans for what kind of business? Katrina's pause was barely perceptible, but I caught it. Landscaping equipment, I think. Or maybe construction. I'd have to check the records to be sure. Her second lie. The fictional Morrison Landscaping Services. Katrina, I need to tell you something. Last week I applied for additional flood relief assistance. They required documentation of any assets or inheritance I might have received in the past 20 years. The color drained from her face. What did you tell them? The truth. That I'd inherited nothing significant when our parents died, but they said they needed to verify that with official records. I opened the manila envelope and pulled out the first document, the original probate filing showing the estate's true value. This is what they found. Katrina stared at the document, her hands trembling slightly as she recognized her own handwriting on the legal forms. Neil, I can explain. $620,000, I said, quietly. That was the real value of Mom and Dad's estate. Bank accounts, investments, life insurance, the house, and property. Over $300,000 that should have come to me. You don't understand the complexities involved in settling an estate. There were so many factors like Morrison Landscaping Services. I pulled out the forged loan documents, the company that Dad supposedly guaranteed loans for. Except Dad never owned a landscaping business, and this isn't his signature. Katrina's breathing became shallow, rapid. Neil, you're jumping to conclusions. There are explanations for all of this. Are there explanations for these? I spread out the photographs Samuel had taken of her surveillance files. Pictures of me going to work shopping for groceries, living my daily life, while she watched and documented my every move. Her facade finally cracked completely. The careful composure, the loving concern, the sisterly worry, all of it fell away, leaving something cold and calculating. You broke into my storage unit. I discovered the truth about what you've been doing to me for 15 years. Katrina sat back in her chair, her mind racing. I could see her weighing options, considering damage control strategies, trying to find a way to spin the situation to her advantage. Even if some of the paperwork was irregular, she said carefully, that doesn't change the fundamental facts. Mom and Dad trusted me to handle their affairs. They knew I would make responsible decisions. Responsible decisions like forging Dad's signature on loan documents, like stealing my inheritance and watching me struggle for over a decade. I didn't steal anything. I made executive decisions about how to distribute assets in a way that would benefit both of us long term. The sheer audacity of her rationalization was breathtaking. Even caught red-handed with evidence of massive fraud, she was still trying to frame it as good judgment. Benefit both of us. Katrina, you've been living in a mansion while I worked night shifts just to afford a studio apartment. You drive a car that costs more than I made in 2 years. How exactly did stealing my inheritance benefit me because you would have wasted it? The words exploded out of her with 15 years of suppressed justification. You would have spent it on some foolish investment or given it to that ex-wife of yours or lost it gambling or drinking. I saved you from yourself by taking everything that was rightfully mine. By putting it to better use, I built a business. I created value. I made smart investments. Your $300 became the foundation for a real estate empire, an empire that's currently bleeding money every month. I pulled out her recent bank statements. You're broke, Katrina. You spent 15 years living off my inheritance, and now it's gone. Her eyes widened as she recognized the documents. How did you? The same way I found out about the men you hired to have me killed. The accusation hung in the air between us like a live wire. Katrina's face went completely white, her hands gripping the edge of the table. I don't know what you're talking about. The medical building parking lot. 2 men in dark jackets discussing the best way to make my death look like a random mugging. I pulled out Samuel's phone and played the recording of her voice discussing plans for my accident. Katrina listened to her own words with growing horror, realizing that her entire conspiracy had been documented, recorded, and preserved as evidence. Neil, that wasn't what it sounded like. I was trying to protect you, protect me from making the wrong decisions. If you discovered the truth about the inheritance, you would have sued me, destroyed my life, taken everything I'd worked for. I couldn't let that happen. So you decided to murder me instead. I decided to find a permanent solution to a problem that was spiraling out of control. There it was, the admission I needed. Katrina had just confessed to planning my murder in a room at her own country club, surrounded by the kind of witnesses who would remember every detail. You hired men to kill me because I might have discovered that you stole my inheritance. I hired men to solve a problem before it destroyed both our lives. I gathered the documents back into the manila envelope, my hands completely steady, despite the magnitude of what I just accomplished. 15 years of lies, theft, and deception had just collapsed in the space of an hour. Where does that leave us, Katrina? She stared at me with wild eyes, her perfect composure completely shattered. What do you want? I want my inheritance back. All of it. With 15 years of interest. I don't have that kind of money anymore. Then you'll sell the house, the business, everything you bought with my stolen inheritance. You'll liquidate every asset and return what you took from me. And if I refuse, I stood up, tucking the envelope under my arm. Then I go to the police with evidence of forgery, fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. You'll lose everything anyway. Plus, you'll spend the rest of your life in prison? Katrina sat frozen, staring at the table where the evidence of her crimes had been spread out moments before. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. She'd spent 15 years building a life on stolen money, and now the foundation was crumbling beneath her. You have 48 hours to decide, I said, walking toward the door. After that, I take everything to the authorities and let them sort it out. Neil, wait. Her voice was small, desperate. We're family. Surely we can work something out that doesn't destroy both our lives. I paused at the door, looking back at the woman who had called herself my sister while planning my murder. Family doesn't steal from each other, Katrina. Family doesn't watch each other struggle while living off their pain. And family definitely doesn't hire killers when their crimes are about to be discovered. Please, I'm begging you. You should have thought of that 15 years ago. I left her sitting alone in the country club dining room, surrounded by the luxury she'd built with my stolen inheritance. Through the window, I could see Samuel's truck waiting in the parking lot, ready to take me to the next phase of our plan. For the first time since the flood destroyed my house, I felt like I was finally going home. But the game wasn't over yet. Katrina was cornered now, desperate and dangerous. The next 48 hours would determine whether she'd accept defeat gracefully or fight back with everything she had left. Either way, I was ready for whatever came next. Katrina chose to fight. The call came 36 hours after our confrontation at the country club. Samuel and I were staying at a different motel one farther from town, where we felt safer while waiting for Katrina's response. When my phone rang with her number, I almost didn't answer. Hello, Katrina? Neil. Her voice was different now, harder, stripped of all pretense. I've thought about your ultimatum, and I'm not going to be blackmailed by my own brother. If you take those documents to the police, I'll make sure you regret it. I'd expected this. Desperate people rarely surrender without exhausting every option. And Katrina had spent too many years in control to give up easily. What does that mean? It means I have resources you don't know about, connections, people who owe me favors. If you try to destroy my life, I'll make sure yours ends first. The threat was clear, but it didn't carry the weight she intended. Samuel had anticipated this exact response and prepared accordingly. Katrina, there's something you should know. This conversation is being recorded, and copies of all the evidence are already in safe deposit boxes at 3 different banks. If anything happens to me or to Samuel, everything goes directly to the police. Silence stretched across the line. Furthermore, I continued, the statute of limitations on estate fraud is 15 years from discovery, not from commission. I just discovered your crimes last week. You're still vulnerable to criminal prosecution. You're bluffing, am I? Are you willing to bet the rest of your freedom on that assumption? Another long pause then. What do you really want, Neil Money? Because I can make you rich without destroying both our lives. I want exactly what I said. My inheritance back with interest. The house alone is worth more than what I allegedly took from you. Allegedly, I almost laughed. Katrina, I have your handwriting on forged documents. I have recordings of you planning my murder. There's nothing alleged about any of this. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. If I give you everything what happens to me, you start over at 65, just like you forced me to start over at 63. The difference is you'll be starting over with the knowledge that you brought it on yourself and the criminal charges. That depends on how cooperative you are with the restitution process. The line went dead. 2 hours later, Samuel spotted 3 men in a dark sedan parked outside our motel. We'd been expecting this too. Katrina's final play would be to eliminate the evidence by eliminating us, regardless of the consequences. She was too far in to turn back now. We slipped out the back window of our room and into Samuel's truck, which he'd parked behind the building for exactly this purpose. As we drove away, I called the local police field office, simultaneously reporting an imminent threat against our lives and providing the location of evidence that would support federal charges against Katrina. This is it, Samuel said, as we headed toward the police station. No more waiting, no more games. Time to let the professionals handle things. The next 72 hours were a whirlwind of interviews, depositions, and legal procedures. Federal agents raided Katrina's storage unit, her home, and her business offices, seizing boxes of evidence that painted a clear picture of systematic fraud spanning 15 years. The forged documents, the surveillance files, the recordings of her hiring men to hurt me. everything built an airtight case. Katrina was arrested at her real estate office on a Tuesday morning, led away in handcuffs in front of clients and colleagues who'd never suspected the elegant businesswoman was capable of such calculated cruelty. The local news covered the story extensively, describing it as one of the largest cases of family fraud in the state's history. But the media attention was nothing compared to the phone calls. My extended family, the same relatives who distanced themselves from me based on Katrina's lies, suddenly wanted to reconnect. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years called to express shock and support. Aunt Dorothy left tearful voicemails apologizing for believing Katrina's stories about my supposed drinking and mental instability. We should have known. My cousin Mike said when he visited me at the small apartment Samuel had helped me rent near the police station. Katrina always was too slick, too perfect. But we wanted to believe her version of events because it was easier than questioning someone so successful. I understood their position, but forgiveness would take time. These people had abandoned me when I needed the most, choosing to believe comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths. Their apologies were sincere, but they couldn't erase the months of isolation and rejection. The legal resolution took 6 months. Katrina's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal that would allow her to keep some assets in exchange for cooperation, but the evidence was too overwhelming. She was convicted on multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy, receiving a sentence of 12 years in federal prison. More importantly, for my future. The court ordered complete financial restitution. Katrina's house, her business, her investments, even her jewelry. Everything was liquidated to repay what she'd stolen from me. When the final accounting was complete, I received $437,000, my original inheritance plus 15 years of compound interest. For the first time since the flood, I was financially secure, more than secure. I was wealthy enough to live comfortably for the rest of my life, without ever working another night shift. But the money, satisfying as it was to recover, wasn't the most important thing I gained from the ordeal. The most important thing was Samuel. "So what's the plan now, brother?" Samuel asked, as we sat in the lawyer's office watching them process the final restitution payments. Big house, fancy car, country club membership. I've been thinking about that question for weeks, ever since it became clear that justice would prevail and my financial future would be secure. What did a 63-year-old man do with sudden wealth and complete freedom? "I'm thinking about buying some land," I said. "Somewhere quiet, maybe with a workshop, where I can work on projects that interest me instead of cleaning office buildings." "Sounds nice." "Peaceful room for a friend to park his truck when he's between routes." "Maybe build a guest house for a retired driver who's ready to stop living out of truck stops." Samuel's weathered face broke into a slow grin. "You offering me a job, Neil?" "I'm offering you a home. A real one, with your own space, and no schedule except what we decide for ourselves." "What would I do all day? I've been driving truck for 18 years. For 18. "Whatever you want." Fish work in the garden, fix things that break. Teach an old man how to use all the features on that laptop computer, be family. The word hung between us, carrying all the weight of what we'd been through together. Samuel had risked his life to help me discover the truth, had stood by me when my actual family had turned away, had proven that blood means nothing compared to loyalty and genuine care. "Family?" Samuel repeated thoughtfully. I liked the sound of that. 6 months later, we were living on 43 acres of rolling hills an hour outside of town. The property had a main house, a workshop, and a smaller cabin where Samuel had set up his own space. We'd built a garage for his truck, though he'd officially retired from long-haul driving, and installed a workshop where we could pursue projects that interested us instead of working to survive. The land came with a small pond, perfect for the fishing Samuel had always talked about but never had time for. We spent mornings on the water, afternoons working on various repair and construction projects around the property, and evenings sitting on the porch sharing stories and planning improvements. It was the first time in my adult life that I felt genuinely at peace. The isolation from my biological family was complete and intentional. Katrina was serving her sentence in a federal facility 800 meters away, and I had no desire to visit or correspond with her. My cousins and extended relatives had been forgiven but not forgotten. I was polite when they called, but made no effort to rebuild relationships that had proven so fragile. "You don't miss having a big family around for holidays?" Samuel asked one evening as we watched the sunset paint the sky orange and pink over our pond. "I do have family around for holidays," I said, gesturing toward him. "The best kind. The kind that chooses to be here." Samuel nodded, understanding what I meant. Grace had been gone for 3 years when we met, and his daughters lived busy lives across the country. We'd become each other's family by choice, rather than accident of birth, bound together by shared experience rather than shared genetics. The phone rang occasionally with business calls about the land, the investments I'd made with my recovered inheritance, or legal matters related to Katrina's case. But mostly our days were quiet and purposeful. We worked when we felt like working, rested when we needed rest, and helped each other with whatever needed doing. One afternoon while we were building a new shed behind the workshop, Samuel paused in his hammering and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "You know what I realized the other day? What's that?" For 40 years, I worked jobs where other people told me what to do, when to do it, how fast to drive, where to stop. I thought that was just life. And now I know the difference between working to survive and working because you choose to make everything better. I understood exactly what he meant. The night shift custodial work had been about desperation, about accepting whatever was available just to keep a roof over my head. The projects we worked on now were about satisfaction, about building something we wanted to exist because we enjoyed the process of creation. 2 years after Katrina's conviction, I received a letter from her in prison. The envelope sat unopened on my kitchen table for 3 days before I finally decided to read it. The letter was 5 pages of justification and self-pity, explaining how she'd only been trying to protect me from my own poor judgment, how she'd invested my inheritance wisely until circumstances beyond her control had forced her into desperate measures. She claimed to miss our family relationship and hoped that someday we could reconcile. There was no genuine apology, no acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused, no recognition that her actions had been fundamentally wrong. Even facing 12 years in prison, Katrina was still trying to rewrite history to cast herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of her own downfall. I burned the letter in the fireplace that evening, watching the pages curl and blacken until they became ash. Samuel didn't ask what I decided about responding to her. He understood that some relationships can't be repaired because they were never genuine to begin with. "No regrets?" he asked as the last of the letter disappeared into flames. "None," I said, and meant it completely. On my 66th birthday, Samuel and I hosted a small celebration on our land. A few neighbors we'd grown friendly with, the lawyer who'd helped recover my inheritance, and one of the agents who'd worked Katrina's case. Nothing elaborate, just grilled food and conversation as the sun set over our pond. 3 years ago, I was sleeping on a cot in a Red Cross shelter, I told the small group, as we sat around a fire pit Samuel had built from stones we'd cleared from the pasture. I thought I'd lost everything that mattered. "Turns out you hadn't lost anything important," Samuel said, raising his beer bottle in a casual toast. "You'd just been carrying around some dead weight that needed to be cut loose." The others laughed, but I knew Samuel was exactly right. Losing my house in the flood had felt devastating at the time. But it had led me to discover truths that needed to be revealed and connections that needed to be made. If the hurricane hadn't forced me into that night shift job, I never would have met Samuel. If I hadn't been desperate enough to ask Katrina for help, I might never have learned about her betrayal. Sometimes I said, looking around at the faces of people who'd become my chosen family. Losing everything you think you want is the only way to discover what you actually need. Samuel raised his bottle again, to new beginnings and real family. To home, I said, gesturing toward the land around us, the workshop where we spent our days, the cabin where my best friend lived, and the house where I slept without worry or fear. As our small group talked and laughed around the fire, I reflected on how completely my life had changed. 3 years ago, I'd been a man without family, home, or hope. Tonight, I was surrounded by people who cared about me. Living on land I owned free and clear with enough money to live comfortably and the freedom to spend my days however I chose. The inheritance she'd stolen and spent was back in my hands, but the real treasure was sitting beside me telling stories about his trucking days and planning tomorrow's fishing expedition. I'd started this journey believing that family was about blood, that home was about property, and that security was about money. Now I knew that family was about loyalty, home was about peace, and security was about having people in your life who would stand by you when everything fell apart.